Once you go up,
Okay, check. Is it on? Hey guys, good morning. Thanks for being patient and thanks for being early-ish, yeah. Welcome to the Sixth Sense Festival and more importantly, welcome to the TouchDesigner Sessions India, the first ever TouchDesigner Sessions India. I already met Stefan from the Node Institute, MXZine. Thanks, Stefan, for being here and organizing all of this for us. We're super excited to hear some of the artists take us through their workflow and then also the panel discussions that happen over the next 2 days. So I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce our first artist, maybe, and the Node Institute.
Yeah, hello, welcome. Thank you, Kunal. I have to mention that without Kunal, all of this wouldn't happen. Be here now. I'm not going to make too many words because we have already piled up a little bit of delay. But the main point of this whole thing is also that all of you get to know each other. That's why even though we have hourly slots, we make sure that there's enough time for you to mix and mingle. And please also take the opportunity to see who else is in the audience. I can tell you, usually they're all very interesting people. And talking about interesting people, we're also super happy to have Sanjana here, who's going to do the first talk and is going to introduce us to her work. So Sanjana, thank you very much for joining this session, and I'm very curious to learn more about your wonderful work. Thank you for coming.
Hi everyone, I am Sanjana. I go by the artist name Optikbloom. I'm an illustrator and a visual artist. I work as a VJ, which is a visual jockey. I work for music visuals and at, yes. Yes, I'm just going to start again. So hi, I'm Sanjana. I go by the artist name Optikbloom. I'm an illustrator and a visual artist. My work is inspired by nature and wildlife. I have a deep love for music and music gatherings, raves and festivals. I think my artistic practice is deeply rooted in observation. I can spend hours looking at natural forms and patterns, observing the details and documenting them. And I often go back to these pictures to find inspiration while working on a creative project. These are some photos from my gallery. where I've documented a lot of the patterns in nature and natural forms and objects, and they are kind of the basis of my artistic practice, and that's where I draw a lot of my inspiration from. I think being in nature, I find a childlike curiosity. I can spend a lot of time just looking at that space, that natural forms and organisms that inhabit that space. I think the more I've done that over the years, the more curious I've gotten about what are these animals living here, how are their lives, and curious to more learn about them, be more sensitive around them. So that is something that inspires me, and I think that is where generative art comes in, because I think over time, observing the natural patterns in nature, I started looking at generative art in nature and how these patterns exist in nature, and they sort of form kind of like a code or a mathematical code that flows through these different patterns. Like if you see the branching structures of corals are similar to the branching structures of the trees, and you see the reaction diffusion patterns in zebra stripes and mushroom gills and many other such examples. And I think for me, I observed that there was like a visual thread that connects all of these forms and patterns, and that became something I started diving deep into. And that's when I discovered I wanted to like translate those patterns into some kind of animation or visuals, and that's where you see these are the different patterns with the reaction diffusion and the zebra stripes and the Voronoi patterns and the honeycomb, the Fibonacci sequences and the ferns. So I think this is what kind of piques my curiosity, and I wanted to see how to recreate this, and TouchDesigner being a generative art tool, I discovered it through this lens, and this is one of the floral object that I've created in TouchDesigner, and it's inspired by this flower that I was looking at. So I think this is just one of the examples of finding ways to interpret these organic patterns and forms, and how I started exploring TouchDesigner. I always wanted to learn like animation tools, but After Effects and other animation tools seemed a little too intimidating for me. So seeing the node-based system within TouchDesigner, having a more visual representation, it kind of felt a little bit more intuitive, even though I'm not very good at math and I was really scared to get into it because of the coding and number aspect of it. But I think there's like a great community around TouchDesigner tutorials, and it became kind of a self-exploration of like looking at tutorials online and seeing how I can learn it through that, and that's why it's been pretty easy for me to get into TouchDesigner, because I think there's a lot of resources online that you can access, and it's a really supportive community. And here at the festival also you see so many artists displaying their work, and everybody has a different workflow, and I think it's been a great time for us sharing our workflows with each other and our knowledge around TouchDesigner and these generative art tools. So before I get into, there are two aspects of my art practice. One is VJing and one is the wildlife illustration. That's where I started. So I want to kind of take you through some projects that I worked on in terms of the illustration practice and how that started. That is like the basis also of my VJing practice. So this is one of the projects that I worked on, which is a field guide, a mushroom field guide called Mushrooms of Uru, and it explores the fungal landscape of Bangalore, especially in Carbon Park in Lal Bagh. And this was kind of, I mean, I love mushrooms, and I think that's where I was attending this walk, which was like a foraging walk in Carbon Park, which was organized by this mushroom wellness band called Nuvedo. And while we were walking there, we kind of found so many different species of mushrooms, and it was just so interesting to see that so much can exist within the urban landscape that we don't know of. And I think that's where the idea started from, and we started looking into how we can make this information more accessible to the audience and see how mushroom identification can be simplified in a very small booklet format, and people can just carry that around while they're walking around the parks and discover these wonderful mushrooms all around. So I was working as a graphic designer and an illustrator during this project, and we were working with a team of mushroom experts and mycologists, and the team at Novedo. We kind of collected data and information around these mushrooms, and I was in close contact with mycologists, understanding what is the best way to represent this so it can be used for identification purposes. And I think that these are some of the process drawings from that time, and some photos from the field, and how we were trying to see what are the gill arrangements like, what do the spores look like. And I think all of this kind of help, I mean, the practice of observation here comes into play, because I think I observe a lot in nature, and that helps me also create these hyper-realistic illustrations which can be used for scientific purposes as well. These are some of the pages from the field guide where you can see the information about the particular species of mushroom, where to find them, if they are edible or not. There's some basic information around this, but it's kind of like a fun field guide to get you interested into this fungal landscape. There's some more pages. So I think this was one of the first project, and the second one I want to talk about is a wildlife board game which is based around the Nilgiris, and it's a strategy board game, and it focuses on exploration, conservation, and learning about the natural ecosystems of the Nilgiris. And why Nilgiris? Because Nilgiris is a very ecologically sensitive zone, and it's got 5 different types of habitats that are home to many different endemic species. So I think like an interesting focus area, and we here also worked with a game designer, a producer on board, and an environmental expert that works primarily around the conservation of flora and fauna in the Nilgiris. So I started the visual identity, and the full graphic design is something that I contributed to in this game. And we started with the game cover. You can see a process video of how the composition, adding some elements, which animals to use on the, so we used the Nilgiri thar, which is like a very endemic species over there, and also the Nilkurunji bloom. You can see the blue flowers. So Nilgiris gets its name from this Nilkurunji flower that blooms every 12 years on the slopes of the Shola grassland habitat, which is very, it's only found in the Nilgiris. So I think we wanted to include that on the cover. It's got many different endangered species, also some common species. We've got mammals, birds, flora and fauna, and you can, it's kind of an immersive board game. It's a really long form board game. It goes on for 3 to 4 hours, but you can really get into understanding what is the wildlife landscape of the Nilgiris through the medium of gaming. And I think it's an interesting way to learn about what are the conflicts, the issues, rather than reading maybe a scientific paper or an article. I think it's this game, it allows you a lot of play and fun kind of way of approaching this subject. And here in the game you can take a role of a forest ranger, a photographer, an activist, a nature lover, among other characters. And you can go on conservation missions, resolve wildlife conflicts, and then you get to earn experience points and discover and conserve different species. And the more ecology points that you gain, you get to win the game. So this is how the game mechanics work. I think creating the visual language, this is a slide which has all like the UI design and the components. So creating like a visual language that seamlessly ties together. It's also aesthetic and it's functional. So these are some of the components of what the game cards are made of. I was talking about how Nilgiris is a really ecologically sensitive zone with 5 different unique habitats hosting range of endemic species. So here you can see these are the biome cards that make the map for the game where you travel through these different habitats and you discover the species found in those specific habitats. So here you see the shola grasslands and the evergreen rainforests. And while we were working on this game, Vasant, who was an environmentalist on board, we were going back and forth as to how to really represent these. And I think it was like a lot of attention to detail in this process. And we really got into like, okay, we should really try to do this well and really get the details correct. So a lot of the information in the game is given by Vasant, which is like data from the field. And it's, so this game can be used for educational purposes. It's not just based on like a fantasy, but it's actually rooted into the real environmental issues that are there in the Nilgiris and the animals and flora, fauna that exist there. These are the mammal cards, some of the process drawings and the final output. So I think this project was really interesting for me because I got to it. I thought it will end in 6 months, the project, but it went on for 2 years. So for 2 years, I was kind of immersed in this world and learning about the different flora and fauna by illustrating them, by looking at the details, and it kind of just it was a really rewarding experience. We also kickstarted this project and got some funding, and now it's going into production and it's going to be shipped worldwide. So people are able to understand about such a local issue of like place in India, Nilgiris, and what are the animals and birds and species that live there. And I think games are a great way to approach the subject. And this was one of the projects I wanted to share with you. So, I mean, this is starkly different from my VJing practice, and I wanted to talk about why I find similarities in how I approach illustration and VJing, and I think it's that space of curiosity. So when I'm out in nature, I think with nature and spaces where there's music, I find myself connecting to like a deeper part of myself, and I think that is a similarity between these two spaces, and they allow room for connection and play, and also like community in some ways, and how the space can be a room for collective healing. And I think I had already started creating visuals on TouchDesigner by then, and I was wondering like which spaces this would fit in, which spaces I connect to personally, and I think this was kind of a space that I connected to personally, and I wanted to, and there is a demand for music visuals now in the growing underground electronic scene in India. The music scene is growing, and there is a demand for visuals. So I think it's also a space where I got a lot of creative freedom, and I got some gigs to work on, and it just all started at a very basic level. I was just like renting out my own projector, doing some visuals for a friend, and then I think like it just kind of experimenting from that. I got booked by some venues, and slowly, it all kind of started, and I started exploring this aspect. And I think it's a very interesting space because people come there with this intention to relax and like chill, relax, and just be themselves. And I think that's a great space for me. I wanted the visuals to kind of also work in that scenario because people are already open to receiving that information. They're open to connecting with themselves along with like getting lost in the music. So I think audio visual experiences in such spaces can be a quite powerful medium to connect with people. And I think that's what keeps me motivated to create more visuals. Personally, these are some of the visuals that I've created on TouchDesigner, and I'm drawn to like psychedelic, hypnotic, electronic music, which is kind of deep and introspective. So I think even the visuals that I'm creating, they have that pace and rhythm where they slowly evolve over time, and they are inspired from nature, natural phenomenon, and somehow I've gravitated towards those artists who are playing this kind of music and collaborated with them to create shows, which can have an interesting effect on people when the music and the visuals go together in some kind of a hypnotic rhythm. And like it can transport you if you're open-minded and willing to experience that in that moment and transport you into another reality. And I think that's what I find really amazing about raves and parties, that I can, I feel like I can connect with myself. It's kind of like a interesting space to experiment with. It's also like it helps me to keep on my toes and keep like creating new content for shows, and that also helps me practice TouchDesigner. So I think that way I've been able to like be a little disciplined about the whole practice of learning the software, seeing where the visual art is placed. So I wanted to talk about some of the recent festivals that I was a part of, and this was the most recent one. This happened last month in Goa. So this was a rural festival takeover at this venue called The Loft in Goa, and it had a lineup of Japanese and Indian artists, and the festival had 3 stages. One of them, I got an opportunity to design like the stage design for it and projection map that surface, and something around stage design is also been interesting to me recently. So I've been exploring that. I collaborated with an artist who was doing the lights, and I was taking care of the design, and we both worked on this project together. So getting into stage design, I think it's a very interesting space for me right now. I'm finding a lot of inspiration coming in to see what could be these stages that can be reimagined, and through my inspiration of natural patterns and forms in nature. I think here also I was kind of looking at creating this cellular kind of structure, which is like a dome shape, but it also is it's a concave dome shape, so it pulls you in, and it just really started from a vague thought about like bubbles and cells, and I wanted to include that into the stage design. So started sketching it out. You can see some of the process sketches over there and seeing how it would fit into the space. So this was something that evolved over time, and Shashwat, who was the 3D artist and also the light designer for this, he kind of rendered out 3D models of the stage, and we were planning out the size and structure. We kind of thought we would use different sizes of circles and maybe have like some circles plain, some textured, to just make it ready for production. This is all the stuff that goes behind like having the exact dimensions ready for production. I also wanted to use some textural elements into the stage design, and here again I was looking at natural patterns like Voronoi and reaction diffusion, and I think adding these textural elements into the stage was with the intention of like when the light falls on it, it creates a additional layer of depth and interaction with the surface. So this is how we were imagining it, and then it went into, there was a production team on board, so it went into production. We used metal to weld together like these hollow rings, and then add a cloth surface on some of the rings and have a textured material on the other rings. And that kind of came together because the production team was great, and it was just a very quick response. So I think here I wanted to talk about, I mean, these are some images of us rigging up the stage and from the projector setup and mapping. So I think what I want to talk about is what attracts me towards DJing is also like, I mean, when I'm illustrating, I'm mostly in my studio, I'm working in my own personal space. But when it comes, I think what I was really missing was like the community angle and also being engaged in the physical space, handling challenges which are a bit more tangible and working with people. And I think this is what gets me into, you know, doing these shows. And there's a lot of things that go behind these shows, the technical bits, in which that you have to set up the stage and the projection mapping within a very short timeline. There's definitely a lot of challenges when it comes to events. So, I mean, but it's also a beautiful space because you collaborate with different people, you work through those challenges, and there's a lot of late night setups, last moment challenges that come up, but you always have to be switched on, learning on the job, and keep going. And I think being open to, earlier I would be really scared to be in such a space because it kind of feels like high performance, that, you know, something could go wrong and there's an audience. Again, this is a completely different space from how I work on illustrations, which is in my studio, but this is like a performance kind of setting. So you do fear making mistakes, but every time you make that mistake, I think it teaches you something new, and you keep evolving and changing over time, and approaching it in that way as a beginner's mindset, as something you can learn from, is has been quite rewarding. Now this is the VJ setup. So we had 2 laptops. One was running the lights. So there were LED strips also which were running in the circle. So we had a combination of visuals and LEDs and audio reactivity within the LEDs, and also the textured parts. We also had lasers. So it was kind of an experiment. It was for an underground scene. So we had some kind of budget through which we put all this together. But yeah, so I think here I wanted to talk about how I work on content for a show. And I think mostly the shows that I've been working on are like improvised DJ sets. So I don't know what they're going to play. It's not something I know that it's like, you know, what's going to be the vibe and stuff. So I usually research on the artists I'm going to be performing for that show. I listen to their music and try to gauge the vibe and see what kind of visuals I'm imagining from my end, and what will also work with the artist's music. And I try to kind of gauge what would be the show like. And I think it's a lot of like hit and miss sometimes, trial and error, but it's kind of experimental in nature. Setting up the show, I think usually I create slow, medium, fast clips, which you can use to mix live, and you can change it according to how the music changes, how the rhythm of the music changes. I use Resolume as the live mixing software, and it's a really great software. I mean, that's the sort of first software that I learned while I was learning VJing, and it helps you kind of mix visuals and change colors and experiment really on the go. And initially, that would really make me nervous, like how am I supposed to experiment on the go? I wanted to have everything pre-planned because that's just the kind of person I am. But I think that's really put me into a space of experimentation and allowing those happy accidents to happen, and, you know, make some new discoveries along the way. So, yeah, I think that's a very core part of VJing. And so for the rural showcase, I wanted to create like that organic cellular vibe for the stages there. So I wanted to have, you know, patterns from nature be part of the content. So it looks in those lines, and this was one of the inspiration, reaction, diffusion. So how I go about creating these patches is because I think a lot of the TouchDesigner stuff you're learning from tutorials. So I think this was a tutorial by Electronaut where he was teaching about reaction diffusion. So I usually learn from the tutorial, I play around with the parameters, I try to create something unique for myself through it. Even this was fractal structures and leaves, so I was trying to see if I could bring that into the stage design so it looks a little bit more alive and like it's breathing. So yeah, so what I was saying about like how to create these patches, I learn from tutorials and I change around the parameters. I add some operators that I think would work, and it's a lot to, nothing seems like, you feel like you're going to make something and then something else comes out, and it's just pure experimentation. And that's what I really love about TouchDesigner, that I don't know what the end output is going to be. It's just going to kind of flow with how things are experimented with. These are some of the patterns I was looking at as well. So this is the cement roof on in my house, and I think I was like really looking at it and seeing how I can recreate it. So I used noise to recreate this, and this was in the show used as a lot of the underlays. So a lot of the patterns in nature and in man-made structures, you do see visual similarities in that, and I think that's where somewhat you do see like this kind of um, code running through these textures and patterns, and that's what really fascinates me and is the basis of my visual practice. Layering on Resolume. So I think with VJing you have different. So what my usual setup is that I render out clips from TouchDesigner and I take them into the live mixing software and then I mix them live with layering. So this is what one of my project files, and you can see the different layers. And here, by rendering out all these different layers, I try to create depth sometimes in the composition. I think the pictures of the ferns, you see, sometimes you notice in nature that you can see the depth and of like the leaf formations, or if you look through a forest. And I was trying to create that into a generative world and create a sort of abstract storytelling, which is more generative in nature and kind of but derives from the spaces like real life natural spaces. So I think this is really important because in Resolume you can use, like I was saying, it's a great software. You can use different blending modes. You can change the colors live. You can. So I think it just kind of flows during the show where sometimes there's only one layer that I'm using. There's sometimes many layers that I'm using, and it depends on the mood of the room or depends on the rhythm of the music. Sometimes it depends on my own mood, and I think it's really abstract, experimental, fun, and it's a great way to, just imagine these spaces. These are some of the pictures from the show of the stage. I think there's no audio input. These are just some of the videos from the show. You cannot hear the audio right now, but yeah. It's fine. Yeah, so that was for the rural showcase. You can see some of the videos on my Instagram as well. This was another show I did, which was an audio-visual gathering, which was a visual-first show, and it's called Satori. It's based in Bangalore. This was one of the first stage designs that I made. It was like a mini stage design installation, which I wanted to map. And what the brief was that, you have to represent yourself as an artist. So here I saw, I think from my name, like the elements of the eye and the blooming flora. So I wanted to create like a symmetrical design that's around these two things. And so in this show, these are some of the sketches that I was ideating on initially. The music was going to be slightly more on the psychedelic side, so I was looking at symmetrical forms that would complement that music. So these were initial designs, and I was feeling like the surface was getting really complicated. I wanted to simplify that further, and so I can have space for the visuals to add the visual detail into the structure rather than the form itself. This was the form that I eventually shortlisted, and here I was imagining that the content would be masked and like placed into these certain like the center circle and the eyes, and this is how the content was eventually placed on this. So I was, this was very interesting. Again, it went into production. We made it with MDF cutout boards and the setup with the mapping. And the mapping happened on Resolume itself. You can do a lot of basic mapping on Resolume. It works well. I think the content for the show is again derived with like symmetrical flora, and I was trying to see how to create this. This was made with props and using the copy. So again, this show had a lot of hypnotic fluid patterns. It had symmetry. We kept a palette of reds and blues and subtle greens and not made it too colorful. So it has like the visual language of Satori, which was the event. They usually use a lot of reds and blues. Some pictures from the show. Moving on to another festival that I was part of, a visual residency. This was Magnetic Fields in 2024. And here we were part of this Sightlines performance, which was through the IMET network, which is a new media arts network. So here there's this performance in magnetic fields that happens. It's called the Sightlines performance, where the folk musicians and the contemporary musicians collaborate on a set which is created on ground few days before the festival. So here, through IMET, we got to go as a visual art team and create the visuals for the show. And I think a lot of this was made on AI, so it's a completely different workflow than what I'm using right now. But a lot of it was made on AI, so I was using a mixture of, we were very inspired by the space and the art and architecture of the space. So it was three of us girl VJs. There was there's Caroline, who's from a more AI background, and there was Parizad, who is based, like her practice is based in photography, and mine is based more on illustration and generative. So we kind of collaborated on this project together, three of us, and we were just walking around the palace, collecting inspiration from the smallest things. Like here you see the doorknobs of the two ladies. These are the doorknobs on the dining hall area, and we kind of use those also as part of the show, because I think a lot of the festival is around like walking around the palace, experiencing the space. So I think we also wanted to create a show in which you feel like the palace is breathing, all the paintings are coming alive, and all the murals on the walls. So we used a combination of photography, taking that into Midjourney sometimes and generating images out of it, and using runway and animating those images. So these are some of the murals from the palace walls. So here I was talking about how it was three of us VJs who were working on this, and we all have different inspirations. So the first one, you see the mesh, that is the mesh on the palace wall, and Caroline she took a video or a photo of that, and she put that into runway, animated it. Then in the middle one, there's like a macro photography of a peacock feather that Parizad used. And in the third one, I was looking at the generative patterns of like sand. So I think it was all just a very experimental, impromptu, spontaneous way of like creating a show. So as it's a collaboration between the folk musicians and the contemporary musicians, the folk instruments were something that really stood out to me. And I felt that maybe we could have them also as part of the show. And there's this instrument called the saranda, and I took that and made some illustrations of it, and I was just looking at it, observing the details, and took that into Midjourney, generated some images, and then added that to Luma AI and animated them. So this was again all very impromptu, and it's just all developed during our time at the palace. Again, there was also like Gond art, folk Gond art on the palace walls, and that was also quite interesting to see how to use those forms to create VJ loops. And in this, here it's a lot about like, I took the pictures, put them into Midjourney, again, like prompting, different kinds of prompting, and finding a unique style, and not just like taking an image and replicating it, but finding different unique visual references, combining them together, and then prompting something that felt like it was in itself not copied from anything, but just kind of, and also using the festival iconography within this, so it's more contextualized. This is all created on Luma AI. These are again Gond art inspired masks. This is like animal, human masks, all animated on Luma AI and created on Midjourney. We also went out into the desert, took some photography, took some videos, and converted those as part of the, even Parizad was kind of leading this way because she's really into photography and video, so then she created some VJ loops around this. This is some of the images from the final show. And there's a video. Yeah, so that was bits from the performance at Magnetic Fields. I would just like to end my talk by talking about how I see myself experimenting in the future. I think a lot of it is to take the projections outdoors, project on nature as a canvas and see how that interacts. I think it's really interesting to see how the natural textures of the leaves, of the barks, of the trees interact with these lights moving on them, and it kind of becomes a collaboration between the visual artist and the natural form. And this is one of the mappings that was done on the trees, and it was actually it was a dying tree. It's a mango tree in Goa which is dying. So we thought we'll map it and bring it back to life. Yeah, I think I just want to talk about also how VJing is a very intensive practice. I mean, you have to work really late nights mostly, and it's been challenging to do that, keep my sleep schedule in place, and but overall it's a really rewarding place. And I think there are more women VJs coming out there now, and in India it can be hard to be out at night at parties, and as a woman I think it was definitely on my mind when I was getting into it, but it's been a really good experience so far. All the organizers have been very caring, and I've felt like, you know, they've made it really easy for women to be a part of this space, and yeah, that's, oops. This is another tree mapping. Yeah. Thank you.
Sanjana, thank you very much for this wonderful talk. 1, 2, 3. It's really nice to see your process, right? And I was kind of wondering, there's like different aspects. You also said they're somehow connected by thought, but maybe not yet by practice. So I wonder, do you see how, you know, that interactivity with TouchDesigner, that drawing the installations, working on a board game, how that could also lead to a closer collaboration between all those fields, maybe also outside the VJ sphere? I was thinking like interactive installations, something where TouchDesigner is used a lot. Is that something that you have in your mind, like a path that you could go to, or are you just happy to go to the festival and explore that world for a little bit?
I think for now, I mean, it's only been 2 years of me exploring this medium, and I definitely see myself also be a part of some immersive experiences where we can bring in information around nature and like generally get people connect. I mean, that is just my intention around this. I think definitely the use of interactivity and is already a part of it, and you'll see in the festival around, and it inspires me a lot. Because I think audiovisual experiences have like it's a really powerful medium for you to maybe connect back to nature that could be just one way, and around like beauty as well, like beauty being something that you gravitate towards, but if it also has a messaging behind it that is strong, I think having a balance of the two is important. Something might just look beautiful externally, but I think visuals and music all affect us at a very subconscious level. Sometimes we don't even know, we can't tell the exact impact of it, but it definitely has a psychological impact on our mental health.
So agencies and producers take note. Are there questions from the audience? Kunal will be with you with the microphone.
Is it on? Yeah. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed it. The tree mapping was cool. The question was specifically about the Jaipur thing that you did. The workflow, can you just expand on the workflow just a little bit? I'm interested in that.
Yes. Yeah. So it was a team of us 3 visual artists who came together. the workflow was really spontaneous. We really had no idea what we were going to make when we started out. But I think because we were all have our mediums of exploration with photography, AI, and some generative patches, illustration, it kind of all blended in together where we started talking about the show, and I think we were just walking around and clicking pictures. I think the first few days we were just clicking pictures and drawing inspiration from the space itself, and then eventually that translated, and then we were creating our own patches or like our own artworks, and then eventually when we were listening to the music, we started piecing the puzzle together, and it fit into one visual set. So it was super improvised. There was no like workflow we had. I think we kind of came up with the workflow on the go. But the work, I mean, it's mostly around like using Runway AI and Luma AI, the tools that we use, Midjourney for image creation and video generation using Runway and Luma, and also bits of TouchDesigner. There were some generative patches as well. So I think it was a very small part of it there. It was mostly like AI driven project. Yeah. Yes.
Song audio that comes in, and you need to somehow come together on that, right?
Yeah.
Again, a very specific question to say, how do you break deadlocks in this kind of a creative environment?
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Deadlocks, right? I mean, creative deadlocks. I come from a software background. We break deadlocks very quantitatively. We are not qualitative enough. So this is, of course, a very different medium.
Yeah.
So wanted to understand from you of how, just your experience, right? There's no right or wrong here.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to get your experience.
Yeah, I think definitely there are creative blocks that happen, and on some days you don't feel creative at all. On some days you feel very creative, and you can't really control that. You just go with the flow and see what. Between the three of us, yes. So I think there's definitely, I mean, you have to kind of divide duties, right? And be like, okay, this is what you take care of, this is what I take care of. But eventually, I mean, we somehow aligned pretty well on this project. We were kind of taking it like as it goes. Like there was no because there was no set language from the beginning. We were seeing each other and getting inspired by each other's process as well. So at times, somebody's inspired by something, and I would also look into that, and it was kind of like flowing in. But there were some days where it was like pretty hard to. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you for that question. In the light of that, we have piled up some delay, and that we have the guys in China who will be talking next, already sitting there for quite some time. We would thank you very much. Of course, you're all invited to ask Sanjana questions as soon as she's off stage and continue that conversation. So thank you much for coming.
Thank you.
In light of that situation, we will also deprive you, our estimated audience, of the chance to have a break. No, we'll have a little break, but we'll try to get on with the interview with Jins and Rokun from the T community as soon as we can. They've built up a huge community in China, TouchDesigner community, in recent years, and we're very curious to hear from them about it. So let's have a little break for the changeover, but be prepared to run back into the auditorium when you hear me announcing them. We're very much looking forward to hear from them. Thank you.